Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Faculty in Focus, where we blur the lines between the work done by Ohio State Lima faculty and the greater Allen County community. I'm your host, Maggie Young, and throughout Faculty in Focus, we will explore Ohio State Lima faculty interests and how they relate to the greater Allen County region. Today, I'm excited to have with me Dr. Britt Collier Gibson. Dr. Collier Gibson is the coordinator of continuing education, director of the honors program, and a lecturer in education. She has a variety of interests, having studied Japanese and East Asian studies, K-12 teaching and learning, and educational leadership. So Britt, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we'd all love to hear a little more about your background, which I find incredibly interesting. So could you share a little bit more about your academic journey?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Excuse me, Maggie. All right. Well, my academic journey. Well, we're not going to start back when I was in kindergarten, but
Fair enough.
could. But let's see. I think jumping to my my undergraduate. So I had spent a little bit of time in Japan in my high school years studying. And so when I went into my undergraduate, I, like so many others, didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And I latched on to Japanese and East Asian studies. And I spent my junior year abroad there. It was obviously, I mean, you can't say, going to Japan and spending a year there with the host family wouldn't be fascinating. It was a really fascinating and very influential year for me. I lived with a host family and they had 3 younger children, which was new for me. And I became very fascinated in the way that they were learning. So I started to study a little bit about Japanese schooling. So I became really intrigued with school systems and international school models. And when I came back to Washington University, where I was getting my undergrad, I started studying education. So I took some classes in education and studied, again, a little bit more about international ed, but I was wrapping up my senior year. So I graduated with a degree in Japanese and East Asian studies. So
yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, what happened after that?
Okay. So I went right into the K-12 system after that. I was really interested in education. I didn't know quite how to incorporate Japanese. I didn't want to go into the corporate world. So I started in a school in San Francisco as a teacher's aide, working with a pretty diverse population. And that's what I wanted. I wanted diversity. So I spent a few years there and got my teaching license from San Francisco State. And then moved to Boston after a few years, where my family is from, and started teaching there. And again, always diverse populations. I worked in a 2-way bilingual program. So I was working with Spanish speakers and native English and merging them together to become bilingual. It was fascinating. So then I led myself, and I was leaded into leadership roles in schools. So I became someone who was on leadership teams and teacher mentor, led some professional development for districts. And then I went back for my master's because I was interested in this. So educational leadership, and my principal's license actually from Massachusetts. So I went to Simmons College there. So it was another, enriching experience. I really never planned to go into principalship. I really believed in teacher leadership and was influenced by many, in that I really believe strongly in having teachers rise and be the decision makers in schools, or one of the main decision makers. So moved to Lima, Ohio, and I won't get into that big transition, but ended up in Lima, Ohio, and taught in the Lima City schools, and also very diverse population.
Right.
Another rich experience is in a different part of the country, but in some ways, a lot of the same issues. So I went into that, and then I gradually got into OSU, kind of through outreach work, actually, which is interesting because I'm doing a lot of outreach now. So, and then played on a lot of different roles and went on to pursue my doctoral degree not very long ago. So maybe 6 years ago, I started and continue to work at OSU and pursue my doctoral degree in teacher leadership, policy, and administration. So
amazing.
there you go.
But it's fascinating. I mean, we come to Ohio State Lima and we work and we know people, that we work with, but you don't necessarily get to know like the whole story. And it's fun to get at least a little bit more information about, how you ended up here and how fortunate we are to have you with your varied experiences. I was wondering next, I mean, you've talked a little bit about this already, about working both in K-12 and in collegiate settings. I think many of our viewers might be interested to know a little bit more about kind of the differences from your perspective in these two different learning environments.
Well, there are strong differences and there are strong similarities. Obviously, students are the focus of each of those, and their best interest is always, should always be at the center of that. What I've found is consistently the complexity of teaching at any level is there. To look at students on so many different levels, to understand them, to understand their background as best as you can and their learning style, and to help with those outside issues that inevitably come into the classroom. So helping them to a certain degree with that, and that's just knowing the students, right? And then there's the crafting of the lessons, right? And the crafting of your classroom. And I've done that in any setting I've been in. So kindergarten, juniors in college, it doesn't really matter. You always have to be thinking about the individual student and the pedagogy. One of the things I love so much about higher ed is the freedom and the creativity that there is in developing your curriculum to a certain degree, right? And really molding it to meet the students' needs. I think that's harder and harder in the K-12 setting these days for a variety of reasons. I don't think it's because of teachers or administrators. I think it comes from a higher level. Again, not in a negative way, just in trying to standardize. And standardization can be really important, but are we over standardizing is what I think about in K-12 education. Are we boxing children in a little bit too much for the sake of keeping them passing tests and within a framework that we call success? So those are a few things. I could probably go on a lot more.
I'm sure maybe that will be another episode of Faculty in Focus, where we focus specifically on K-12 teaching or what we've learned in our experiences. So that's great. So both you and I moved from big cities. I mean, I moved from Austin, Texas, and you moved from Boston, and we ended up in the heartbeat of America in Lima, Ohio. So what do you really like teaching about, or teaching in a smaller city like Lima? What's fun or interesting about this that's maybe different from one of those larger cities that you had experiences in?
It's knowing people, right? You know the students, the area so well. You might even meet their parents in a different capacity on a board. It's easier to bridge the university to the community and the community to the university. And with that, your students, so helping to bridge their worlds back and forth. And I think that's harder in a larger area, Boston, San Francisco, where I live, because of the amount of people. And it really comes back to this personalization. And I believe so strongly in personalizing education. And you need to know, like I said before, you need to know these students. So I'm seeing students on campus, in classes, in clubs. I mean, we cross paths multiple times a day. So hopefully they know me too, and they feel comfortable. I'm accessible. So maybe I'm not as accessible in a bigger city, and they're more accessible.
Well, I think the random encounters at like Chief supermarkets or at Beer Barrel, I mean, that does kind of help add kind of the human element that sometimes we miss out on in
Agree.
larger classrooms or even in larger cities. That the professors that you have, they're humans, and the students that you have, they're humans with
Yeah.
full, rich lives on both sides.
I have a funny story about that. It was one of my first years in teaching in San Francisco. And I randomly, because this really never happened because of the size of San Francisco, I was teaching a first, second grade combination class. And I bumped into one of my students in the supermarket and they completely froze. They were like, as if my whole life, my whole identity, I slept, I breathed, I ate at school. Like they didn't know that I was a real person outside of school who wore sweatpants and, went grocery shopping. So it was really funny. And that was really unusual, where it's not unusual in Lima to do that. And there's a comfort to that.
There is, absolutely. I mean, so continuing our conversation maybe about people,
Mhm.
our research trajectories as faculty members are often shaped by our experiences, yes,
Mhm.
but in some cases, more specifically by the people that we encounter. And I was wondering
Mhm.
if that was maybe true for you as well.
Absolutely. 100%. Um, the people I met along the way were the people that brought me the experiences. And then I created more of those experiences, but it was always with people. So my father was in academia and is still to a certain degree, because once it's in your blood, it's always in your blood, but he's
Mhm.
retired now. So I had that influence from an early age. I grew up on the UCLA campus, essentially. We went to the pool, we went to the concerts, we went to all sorts of things. So that was, and my dad was the one who brought me there initially.
Mhm.
And then in my California years, I was a part of an organization that was doing a lot of school reform. And I met someone, and he was Guatemalan. And he was the first one to be like, you're going to make a difference. Like, you have got to move with this. And then in Boston, I had mentors through trying to think, it was my principal who was going back to school as a 40-year-old man for his doctorate. And I was like, wow, maybe I could do that. Same in Lima. I moved to Lima. I work with Lynn Sametz really closely. She pushed me along hugely. Mike Huffman, who I work with really closely, Lima City Schools, always been a huge believer in me and exposed me to so much. So it continues and I love it. I wouldn't be where I am right now without my mentors, my thinking, my approach. It's a meld of all that they've given me. So I hope that they know how important they are to me.
Well, we'll have to share this episode and let them know that they have little shout outs that they can kind of look to. Um, you've had all of these different kinds of experiences and your interest in learning more about learning. I'm curious about how your teaching approaches have changed or if they've changed over the last year and a half as we've been kind of coping with the COVID-19 pandemic. So
Mhm.
can you say a little bit about how you've changed or in some ways how you maybe haven't changed, but maybe redirected?
Mhm. It's a great question. And I love this because I ramble about this all the time to people, because I'm always trying to look at things from different angles. So the pandemic, obviously horrific, tragic, so many things we can say in that realm. But is it also an opportunity, right, for learning and to rethink? Um, and so about 2 months in, I was, especially with K-12 education, to tell you the truth, I was like, oh, this is it. This is the moment we've been waiting for to break the system. And I mean that in in a positive way and kind of a progressive way, because I think we're very stuck in ways in education. And a lot of times parents want their students to their children to have the same experiences that they did, and we need to have spelling tests still, and we need to, this is success. And so redefining really, what are we doing, which sounds really basic, but schools move at such an incredible pace that sometimes it's so hard to stop and really evaluate, is what we're doing here really meeting the needs of these students to bring them into the world that is different from their parents and will allow them to follow their path to be successful, instead of what we so closely define as success or what their parents define. So I was so excited about this opportunity. I saw little changes. I was part of some committees with my daughter's local schools, and talk with a lot of people in the Lima Allen County area too about these. And little changes did start to happen in different ways of looking. What that will look like in the end, at the end of this year, I don't know exactly. I think the best of it is that people are reconsidering their ways. Have they actually put it into action yet, or certainly not policy yet? I don't know. So it's going to be an exciting time. So I'm looking at that, and then I'm also looking at myself and the changes. And honestly, it's been for everyone just an incredibly hard year, right? And then you're an educator. Yep. And that's a whole other layer, right? Yep. Because schools are some of the most affected institutions. So I, at first, was in complete shock, like us all, although I have some experiences teaching hybrid. So I was really thankful for that. So I knew a bit about that. So it was still really hard. At the same time, a few months in, I was like, this is an amazing opportunity. Like, I need to rethink what I'm doing anyhow. I oftentimes don't get to stop and say, is this the best way to reach these students? What is the more current research on this? And I rethought it, and I redesigned basically every class, which is hard, but it's necessary. And because I had to for the online format, because in my philosophy and studies about this, you don't take exactly what you've done in the face-to-face classroom and try to replicate it online, right? It's that they don't sync. They're two different ways of using tools and engaging audiences, or your students in this case. So as always, I designed it with students at the center of it, but the tools I used were very different. And honestly, I feel like I'm stronger because of it. And I feel like my students, more importantly, I feel like my students are getting the material better.
Great.
So I am trying to look at ways to meet so many different students' needs. Back to, my original statement here about the strength of, education and on any level and teaching. So I'm looking at ways to meet students in online teaching, in face-to-face teaching, and in doing the same thing. I mean, two things at the same time, that's where my learning curve is sharpest right now. I need to learn how to teach in person and be teaching online live stream at the same time, because otherwise I'm focusing on one audience more than the other, and you can't do that. So it's been an amazing opportunity, honestly. And I'm tired, but I think I'm stronger because of it in the end. And hopefully, again, my students are learning better in the end.
Well, that's amazing. And your research is actually in like self-directed or self-regulated learning. So are you doing any projects, or are you kind of thinking about how to do projects that look at maybe the impact or the effect of the pandemic on self-regulated learning in various populations? Or is that something you're interested in?
Absolutely. I mean, I started, I had an interest in this before the pandemic, and looking at the research behind the correlation between self-regulation skills, strong self-regulation skills, and academic success with students. And knowing how important it is for students to learn, and you can understand this from a higher ed perspective, to learn how to move themselves through and not always have our guidance. I mean, yes, but that gradual release, right? And so they do better. We know that. So yes, the pandemic came around and, online education just dropped in everyone's face, and these kids are at home and they're kindergartners and they're 12th graders. And some of them have parents at home and some of them don't have parents at home and some of them have technology and some of them don't. No matter what, they are not getting the guidance of a teacher there. Nothing is quite like that. It's a luxury to have had a parent at home, a caregiver at home who could guide someone through that closely. I don't believe that most people did, and nor are parents wanting to play that role really, or, skilled enough. And I don't mean that, and there's not the love and the care and the,
Oh, no.
but
Yeah, I
right.
mean, as an educator myself, and I had 2 kids at home during the pandemic, there is a reason why I teach adults and
Mhm.
not the tiny humans.
Right.
So yeah, I completely get that. I think any parent who's lived through this past year, parent or guardian or caregiver, really, I mean, we all realize that there's a reason why the teachers are so, why they deserve our respect and
Mhm.
admiration, and how
Right.
skilled they are at making learning fun and interesting and rewarding and engaging. I know I was not capable of doing that.
No,
So,
it's hard to educate your own kids in that way.
mhm,
Um, yeah, and getting back to the complexity in teaching,
right.
you're like, whoa, this is not easy.
Yeah.
So without that, who do we have? We have ourselves,
Yeah.
right? These kids have themselves. So if they are better able to direct themselves, especially in online learning, they have more of a chance of staying on track and knowing themselves so as to guide themselves through. And that's true for kindergartners all the way up and all the way up, to our age. I teach a course on self-regulation, and everyone who I meet all the way up from, to 100 years old says, oh, can I take that course? Right.
Right.
We're all wanting to guide ourselves more and to know ourselves more. So yes, I developed a research project with a friend of mine from my doctoral program, and we developed it with local schools, and it was really looking at self-regulated learning during K-12 education. That's a really broad way of looking at it. Unfortunately, what happened is that it was paused because of my colleague being Chinese. And so he had to go back to China for multiple reasons. So
Mhm.
it's on hold right now.
Okay.
I'd still like to come back to it. I think it's relevant. I think we will be having K-12 education. There will be components of online still for many years to come. So I think there's a place for that. Pat Carroll and I are starting to do some work together. I'm kind of latching on to his work about, revising yourself, finding you're going through different iterations of yourself almost, and
And
how you guide yourself.
we get
Yeah.
to hear from Pat Carroll. He's also one of our speakers on Faculty in Focus. So you can hear a little bit more about his research if you check out his episode. So it's so interesting, these connections that actually came up
Mhm.
as a result of the pandemic. I mean, we started having
Absolutely.
these chats about sharing who we are and what it is that we're doing in a way that was a little bit more accessible because of the pandemic. Well,
Exactly.
I'm so
Yep.
excited to see kind of where that research project on self-regulated learning. I mean, if you need any test subjects, I've got 2 at home, one that seems to be a bit more self-motivated than the other
Right.
and able to kind of regulate his own behavior,
Right.
whereas the other one is he needs a bit more guidance. But you can
Right.
always use my boys as some
Thank you. Wonderful. Yes.
human
And I have
subjects.
2 here too. Same thing. One who has it and one who doesn't. But I don't mean that in its static, right?
Right.
We can mold these things. We know that.
They're
So
teachable skills.
they are teachable skills. So
Yeah,
yes, really, I mean, very pertinent. I think this work will be pertinent for many years to come. I think we all want independent thinking, functioning citizens, right? So
absolutely. Well, I mean, every time I talk with you, Britt, I'm amazed by your passion for education and for advocacy on behalf of our students.
mhm.
And so I'm so glad that you were able to join us for this episode of Faculty in Focus.
Thank you,
So
Meg.
I want to say congratulations on joining the select group of OSU Lima faculty invited to the Mug Club as part of our focus on faculty scholarship, both inside and outside of the classroom. Be sure to check out our other episodes of Faculty in Focus on the Ohio State Lima YouTube channel. And from all of us here at OSU Lima, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Faculty in Focus. Until next time.